The boy stood just beyond the curtain, his hands folded so tightly together that his fingers ached. The stage lights spilled onto the floor in long, blinding streaks, and every sound from the theater beyond, the coughs, the murmurs, the soft laughter, felt like it was echoing inside his chest. He took a slow breath, the kind he had practiced 1,000 times alone, and tried to quiet the storm inside him. His name was Miguel Santos, a 17-year-old from a small coastal town in the Philippines, and in a few seconds, he would step onto the stage of America's Got Talent 2026. For most of his life, Miguel had learned to stay small. He had learned to keep his eyes down, to speak softly, to take up as little space as possible in a world that had never seemed to notice him anyway. Growing up, he lived with his mother and younger sister in a narrow wooden house perched near the shore. When the tide came in, the sea crept close enough that the floorboards would tremble under the waves. His father, a fisherman, had been lost to the ocean when Miguel was 9. One morning, his boat simply didn't return. After that, silence became a permanent resident in their home, broken only by the hum of the wind and the distant crash of waves. Miguel's mother worked long hours selling dried fish and vegetables at the local market. She left before sunrise and returned after dark, her feet sore and her shoulders heavy. Miguel took care of his sister, Rosa, helped with schoolwork, cooked rice when there was enough, and learned to stretch little into something that felt like enough. Money was always short, and dreams felt like luxuries meant for other people. But there was one thing that had always been free: music. Miguel discovered his voice by accident. One night, when he thought everyone was asleep, he sang quietly to himself while washing dishes. The sound of his own voice startled him. It was soft but steady, filled with an emotion he didn't yet know how to name. The next day, Rosa begged him to sing again. Then his mother heard him, pausing in the doorway after a long day at the market, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. "You have something," she said softly. "Don't let it disappear." Miguel sang whenever he could, while walking to school, while waiting for his mother, while staring out at the sea that had taken his father. Singing became his way of speaking the words he could never say out loud. It was how he dealt with fear, grief, and hope all tangled together. At school, though, Miguel stayed quiet. He sat in the back, avoided attention, and shrank away from crowds. When teachers asked questions, he knew the answers but rarely raised his hand. When classmates laughed loudly, he flinched. He didn't feel invisible exactly. He felt transparent, like people could look right through him without ever really seeing who he was. Everything changed when a traveling audition for a televised talent competition came to Manila. Miguel didn't plan to go. He told himself it was unrealistic, that stages like that weren't meant for boys like him. But Rosa found the audition poster and wouldn't let it go. She followed him around the house, waving the paper like a flag. "You always sing for us," she said. "Why not sing for them?" Miguel shook his head. "I'm not like those people on TV." She crossed her arms, her eyes fierce. "You're better. You're just scared." She was right. He was terrified. But that night, as he lay awake listening to the waves, something shifted inside him. He thought about his father's boat disappearing into the dark. He thought about his mother's tired hands. He thought about all the words he had swallowed his whole life. And for the first time, the fear felt smaller than the regret he might feel if he never tried. He auditioned. The local judges were stunned. Some smiled, some cried, and one of them leaned forward and said, "You don't sing like you're showing off. You sing like you're telling the truth." Weeks later, Miguel found himself holding a passport for the first time, boarding a plane to the United States. He had never been so far from home. Everything felt enormous. The airports, the highways, the buildings that seemed to scrape the sky. The AGT set itself felt like another world entirely, buzzing with energy and ambition. Contestants practiced everywhere, voices echoing down hallways, instruments being tuned, laughter and nerves blending into a constant hum. Miguel felt smaller than ever. Backstage, he watched performers rehearse with confidence he couldn't imagine possessing. Some joked with producers. Some practiced dance moves with headphones on. Miguel sat quietly in a corner, his hands resting on his knees, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure someone could hear it. A producer crouched down in front of him and asked gently, "How are you feeling?" Miguel hesitated, scared, he said honestly. The producer smiled. That's okay. Sometimes scared means it matters. Now, standing behind the curtain, Miguel clung to those words. He closed his eyes and thought of home, the smell of the sea, the sound of Rosa laughing, the way his mother's face softened when he sang. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to tell his story. The announcer called his name. Miguel stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. Then he saw the judges. Simon Cowell sat at the center, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Heidi Klum smiled warmly. Howie Mandel leaned forward with curiosity. Sofia Vergara tilted her head, already intrigued. Miguel swallowed. His voice trembled as he introduced himself, his accent thick but his words clear. He spoke about his family, about growing up by the sea, about singing being the one place he felt brave. Simon raised an eyebrow. So what are you going to sing for us today? Miguel hesitated, then answered softly, naming a song that meant everything to him, a stripped-down, emotional ballad about loss and hope. Simon nodded. All right, whenever you're ready. The music began, slow and simple. Miguel closed his eyes. For a split second, fear surged again, threatening to silence him. Then he took one deep breath. And he sang. The first note was quiet, almost fragile. But it was pure. It floated across the theater like a whisper meant for someone specific. The audience leaned in. The judges' expressions changed. Miguel's voice carried a weight far beyond his years, filled with longing, pain, and a gentle resilience that wrapped around every word. As he sang, something inside him loosened. The stage faded away, replaced by memories, the nights singing to Rosa, the empty chair where his father should have been, the hope he carried like a fragile flame. His voice grew stronger, richer, trembling with emotion but never breaking. Simon's arms slowly uncrossed. He leaned forward, his face serious, eyes fixed on the boy in front of him. Heidi pressed a hand to her chest. Sophia's eyes glistened. Howie sat perfectly still, as if afraid to disturb the moment. When Miguel reached the chorus, his voice soared. It wasn't loud for the sake of being loud. It was powerful because it was honest. Every note felt like a confession, every lyric a piece of his heart offered without protection. The audience was silent. No whispers, no shuffling. Just listening. By the final verse, Miguel's hands were shaking, but his voice didn't waver. He sang as if this moment was everything, because it was. When the last note faded, there was a heartbeat of silence so heavy it felt unreal. Then the theater exploded. The audience rose to their feet, applause crashing like a wave. Cheers echoed from every corner. Miguel stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure what to do. He bowed slightly, his face burning, overwhelmed by the sound. Simon stood up. That alone sent another surge of cheers through the crowd. Simon waited for the noise to settle before speaking. Miguel, he said slowly, that was unexpected. Miguel's heart raced. I've heard a lot of singers, Simon continued. And some of them have incredible technique. Some have confidence for days. But very few can do what you just did. You made us feel something. Miguel felt tears spill down his cheeks. He tried to wipe them away but failed. You didn't come out here trying to be a star, Simon said. You came out here telling the truth. And that's why everyone stood up. Heidi leaned into her microphone. You were so shy, and yet your voice is so brave. I felt like you were singing just for me. Sophia nodded. You don't even know how special that is. Never lose that. Howie smiled. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest hearts. You're proof of that. Miguel could barely breathe. He nodded, whispering thank you again and again. Then Simon glanced toward the crowd, then back at Miguel. I want you to remember this moment, he said. Because your life just changed. Miguel didn't fully understand what that meant yet. But he felt it. Backstage, producers hugged him. Other contestants congratulated him. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from numbers he didn't recognize and from home. When he finally answered a video call from his mother, she was crying openly, Rosa bouncing beside her, shouting his name. You did it, his mother said through tears. You did it. Miguel shook his head, smiling through his own tears. We did it, he said. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, rehearsals, performances. Miguel learned to navigate a world that still felt unreal. He was still shy, still quiet, but something had shifted. Each time he stepped on stage, he remembered that first breath, that moment of choosing courage over fear. His performances continued to move audiences. He sang songs about home, about loss, about hope. Each time, people listened. Each time, they felt seen in his voice. Simon often watched him with a thoughtful expression, occasionally nodding in approval. Miguel didn't win the competition. But it didn't matter. Opportunities poured in. Recording offers, invitations to perform, messages from people around the world who said his voice had helped them through dark moments. When the season ended, Miguel returned home to the Philippines for the first time since his audition. The entire village gathered to welcome him. Children held handmade signs. Neighbors clapped and cheered. His mother hugged him tightly, and for the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders seemed lighter. Miguel stood by the sea that evening, singing softly as the sun dipped below the horizon. The waves answered him, steady and endless. He thought about the boy he had been, the one who stayed quiet, who hid his voice, who believed dreams weren't meant for him. He smiled. All it had taken was one breath, one moment of courage, and everything had changed forever.